Hi there, we're going to be doing a review for your quiz tomorrow on solving for a given variable, absolute value, and inequalities. So the first thing we're going to look at is solving for a given variable. If we look at number one, we have AM equals N plus P, and out to the side it says 4A. That means we want to get the A all by itself. Notice that the A is right next to an M. When two things are right next to each other, they're squished together, it means we are multiplying. So in order to get the A by itself, we need to get rid of that M by doing the opposite. The opposite of multiply by M is divide by M. So we need to divide by M. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side, divide by M. So our final answer, those m's cancel out. We just have a left on the left side, and on the right side we have n plus p, the whole thing divided by m. Since the a is all alone, that's our answer. Okay, let's look at number 8 next. Okay, so number 8, we also want to get the a by itself. Notice this is like a two-step equation or a party problem. Here's the A, that's the variable we want, and this would be the host of the party. Then the best friend is the M, and the acquaintance is the B, because the M is closer to the host than the B is. So we want to get rid of the letter farthest from the variable first, which is the acquaintance, the B. The opposite of plus B is minus B. So we minus B on both sides. We have Z minus B equals MA. Now we need to get rid of that best friend, the M. Since they're right next to each other, but they're being times, and we need to divide by M on both sides. The M's on the right side cancel each other out, and we are left with Z minus P divided by M equals A. Okay, that's all that I'm going to do for solving for a given variable. Let's move on to inequalities. Hey, remember when you do inequalities, you have to put a circle on the number, and then sometimes you have to fill the circle in. The way you know whether you fill the circle in or not is if the sign has an equals sign underneath it. So less than or equal to, excuse me, or greater than or equal to. If you have one of these two signs, you're going to fill in the dot. It'll look like this on the number line. If you have a less than or greater than with no line underneath it, then you have an open dot. So for instance, on number 12, you would have an open dot. On number 13, you would have a closed dot. Okay, let's look at number 11. M is less than or equal to 2. So we're going to put a circle on the 2, and we're going to fill in our circle because we have a less than or equal to sign. Now we have to indicate whether the graph is going to the right or to the left. Notice that the small side is by the M. If you look at the letter and you see that the small side is by the M, we're going to draw our arrow towards the small numbers. On number 13, however, if you look, the N has a big side by it. So since the big side is by the N, on number 13, we would draw the arrow towards the big numbers. Okay, so you want to see if the letter is by the small side of the inequality or the big side of the inequality. Okay, when you write inequalities, you can choose any variable that you want. So we're going to be on number 15 and 16. I usually just choose X. Okay, see how the big numbers are colored in? That means the big side has to be by the X. And the number that we want is 4. But it's an open circle. It's an open circle, so we just do a greater than sign. We don't do greater than or equal to. Okay, on number 16, I'm going to choose X. The small numbers are shaded in, so we need to put the small side by the x. The number that goes on the other side is 1 since the dot is on the 1. But our circle is filled in, which means we have to put a less than or equal to inequality instead of just a less than. Okay, then we're going to do or solve our inequalities. Inequalities are solved the same way equations are solved, except for one important detail. If you multiply or divide by a negative, you must flip the sign. Okay, so number 17 and 18 are just one-step equations. I'll just do number 17. We want to add the 8 because that's the opposite to get the x by itself. We add 8 to both sides and we have 9 is greater than x. Okay, sorry, let me pull that up so you can see. So one-step inequalities, we do the opposite to get the x alone, and then you also need to graph it. I'm not going to graph this one. I'll graph one on the back side. So if you turn your paper over to the back, we're going to do number 22. Okay, 22 is a two-step inequality. It's kind of like our party problem. So remember, we want to get rid of the acquaintance first, the number farthest from the variable. So that number is 10. The opposite of a minus 10 is plus 10. We add 10 on both sides, so we have b over 20. The 10's cancel out is less than, because that's the sign that was in our original problem. Negative 11 plus 10 is negative 1. Now we need to multiply by 20. We get rid of the best friend by doing the opposite. So the 20's cancel out. We multiply by 20 on this side, and we have b is less than negative 20. Now notice I didn't flip the sign because I didn't multiply by a negative number. I multiplied by 20. Okay, so the number that you pull over to that side and multiply by, that's the one you need to look at whether it's positive or negative. If that was a negative 20, I would have, if I was multiplying by a negative 20, so if this was negative 1 times negative 20, I would have flipped the sign. But since the 20 is a positive, then I leave the sign how it is. I need to put an open circle on negative 20 to graph. I don't color it in because there's no line underneath the less than. Notice the small side is by the b, so I color in towards the small numbers. Okay, I'm going to move on to absolute value. Remember, absolute value means distance, and distance is always positive. So on number 25, the absolute value of x equals 7. This problem is asking what two numbers are a distance of 7 away from 0 on the number line. So the number 7 is 7 spaces away from 0 on the number line, but the number negative 7 is also 7 spaces away from 0 on the number line. So we could put 7 in for x and it would equal 7, or we could put negative 7 in for x and it would also equal 7. Another way you can write this answer is plus or minus 7. On every absolute value equation, you will have two separate answers. Sometimes your answer will look like this, where it's the same number, just a positive and a negative, but sometimes it will not. So you need to be careful that you follow the steps carefully so that you don't just assume your answer is going to be a plus or minus when it might be two totally different numbers. Okay, so let's look at number 28 next. Remember, the first thing we want to do on an absolute value equation is get the absolute value alone. That means that there's nothing else on the outside of the absolute value. So if we just look at this side of the equation, is the absolute value alone? Yes, it is, because there's nothing outside the absolute value lines. It's okay to have things inside the absolute value lines, but not outside. So step number 1, the absolute value is alone. Now, step number 2 is you have to write two separate equations. Remember how we said the number inside absolute value can be a positive number or a negative number? So we need to write and a second equation that's n plus 9 equals negative 5. Okay, we can have a negative answer or a positive answer. The third step is solve. So you would just subtract 9, the 9's cancel, and we have n equals negative 4. That's our first answer. And on our second equation, n equals negative 14. Okay, so here's an example where the answer was not just plus or minus 4 or plus or minus 14. The answer was negative 4 and negative 14. So make sure that you solve both equations to get both answers because they may not always be the same. Okay, let's do number 35 now. So on number 35, the first step is we need to get the absolute value alone. The absolute value is not alone right now because there is a 3 outside of those absolute value lines. So to get rid of a divide by 3, we times by 3 on both sides. Now we have the absolute value of negative 4m equals 15. Remember, the second step is we have to write two equations, a positive equation and a negative equation. So we have negative 4m equals 15. There's our positive equation. And we also want negative 4m equals negative 15. There's our negative equation. Now we solve. That's the third step. We got the absolute value by itself. Then we wrote two equations. Now we're going to solve. We're going to divide by negative 4 to get rid of the negative 4. And we have m equals negative 15 fourths. That fraction doesn't simplify. That's the simplest that it gets. But if you put it into your calculator and did 15 divided by 4, you would get 3.75. So that's also an acceptable answer. You could write negative 3.75. And then for your second equation, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So this would be positive 15 fourths or positive 3.75.